When 8-year-old Emma Patterson stumbled through the front door that Thursday afternoon, her father thought he was seeing a ghost. The September sunlight carved through the doorway behind her, illuminating what remained of her blonde hair in jagged silhouettes. Patches of scalp showed raw and pink where the razor had scraped too close. Uneven clumps clung to her head like the aftermath of some terrible accident, except this was no accident. Marcus Patterson stood in the garage doorway, grease still coating his knuckles from the carburetor he'd been rebuilding, and for 3 full seconds, his brain refused to process what his eyes were showing him. The wrench slipped from his fingers. Metal clanged against concrete. Emma didn't flinch at the sound. She just stood there in the threshold, her small chest heaving with breath that came too fast, too shallow, like her lungs had forgotten their rhythm. Tears had carved clean tracks through the dirt on her cheeks, but her eyes were dry now. Shock had settled in that peculiar numbness that comes when pain overwhelms the body's ability to process it. Marcus's hands rose halfway to her, then froze in midair. Some primal part of him understood that touching her would make this real, would confirm that this devastation standing in his doorway was actually his daughter, the girl who'd left for school that morning with her hair in 2 neat braids. He'd tied them himself, fumbling with the elastics the way he'd fumbled with them every morning for the past 2 years, ever since Sarah died, and left him to figure out ponytails and bobby pins and all the small rituals of raising a daughter alone. Emma took one step forward, then another. Her sneakers dragged across the hardwood floor, scuffing marks he'd normally tell her not to make. The sound pulled him from his paralysis. Marcus closed the distance between them in 2 strides, and dropped to his knees, bringing himself down to her level. His arms circled her carefully as though she might shatter if he held too tight. She collapsed into him, and he felt the tremors running through her small body, after shocks of terror that hadn't yet subsided. His fingertips brushed the back of her head, where patches of hair had been ripped rather than cut. The stubble felt wrong against his calloused hands, irregular and damaged. Emma flinched. Not from pain, he realized, but from memory. Whatever had happened was still happening inside her head, replaying on a loop she couldn't stop. Marcus felt that flinch travel through his own nervous system like an electric current, and something hot and primal rose from the center of his chest. He swallowed it down. Not now, not in front of her. The clock on the wall read 3:47 p.m. School let out at 3:15. That meant she'd been somewhere for 32 minutes before coming home. Marcus pulled back just enough to look at her face. Her lips moved, trying to form words, but nothing came out. He touched her chin gently, lifting her gaze to meet his. "Baby, what happened?" Emma's voice emerged as a whisper, cracked and small. "It wasn't just today." Those 5 words opened a trap door beneath Marcus's feet. This wasn't some spontaneous cruelty, some playground fight that got out of hand. This was the culmination of something that had been building, growing, feeding on itself while he'd been blind to it. Emma's voice gained a little strength as she continued, each sentence dragging itself out like broken glass. "The boys, 3 of them, their older dad, 11, they've been doing things for months." Marcus's jaw tightened, his breathing deepened, but he kept his voice soft, steady, giving her space to speak. "Tell me everything." "It started in January," she said. "Small things at first. Whispers in the hallway during class transitions. Mocking voices that followed her through the corridors like shadows. They called her strange. They called her weak. They said she cried too easily, that she was the girl whose mom died and couldn't get over it. The words came slowly at first, halting under the weight of shame she'd been carrying alone. Emma described how her sketchbook went missing one day, only to reappear in the trash can behind the cafeteria, pages torn and scattered. Her pencil snapped in half, her backpack dumped out in the mud. She told him about the shoves, the tripping, the way they'd take turns knocking her books from her arms just to watch her scramble to pick them up, papers scattering across the hallway floor while other students stepped over her. The physical escalation had been gradual, each incident slightly worse than the last, testing boundaries that kept expanding because no one ever drew a line. And then she told him something that made Marcus's blood turn to ice. Adults had seen it. Teachers, aides, staff members who stood in hallways as though supervision meant simply occupying space rather than protecting the children in their care. When Emma tried to tell them when she found the courage to speak up, they dismissed her. One teacher in particular kept repeating the same phrase over and over until Emma began to believe it herself. "You're too sensitive," as though the cruelty was her fault. as though an 8-year-old girl grieving her mother should have been tougher, quieter, more convenient. Marcus felt something coil tightly in his chest, wrapping around his lungs like barbed wire. But he kept his voice steady. Emma was finally talking. He wouldn't interrupt her now. She explained how the boys grew bolder each month, certain no one would stop them. And they were right. No one did. Not once. Each complaint was waved away. Each tear met with a shrug. Each small humiliation swallowed because Emma believed in that way only children can. That maybe the grown-ups were right. Maybe she was too sensitive. Maybe she was the problem. Marcus had filed complaints, 3 of them over the past 8 months. He'd sat in the principal's office under Helen Cartwright with her practiced smile and her reassurances that they'd look into it. Each time, nothing changed. Each time, Emma came home a little more withdrawn, a little more convinced that she had to survive this alone. The longer Emma spoke, the clearer the pattern became. This wasn't the chaos of childhood cruelty. This was targeted, sustained, enabled by a system that had looked at his daughter and decided her pain was worth less than keeping certain families happy. Marcus shifted his weight, checking Emma's wrists. Bruises, fresh ones, purple and finger-shaped, where someone had gripped her hard enough to leave marks. His hands trembled as he examined them, fury rising like a tidal wave he could barely contain. Emma's voice dropped even lower. Today was different, Dad. They planned it. She'd waited for the crowd to thin after dismissal like she always did. Safety in delay, or so she'd thought. But as she passed the corner of the gymnasium, footsteps closed in behind her. 3 sets. Purposeful. Too close. She froze, knowing who they were before she turned around. Tyler Whitmore, Brandon Hayes, Connor Mills. They stepped in front of her, cutting off her path, their shadows stretching long across the pavement. Emma tried to run. One grabbed her wrist, another blocked her escape. The third pushed her backward until her shoulders hit the rough wall of the gym. She thought it would be like the other times. A shove, a taunt, maybe her belongings stolen. She could endure those. She had endured them. But Tyler reached into his backpack and pulled out an electric razor. The kind barbers use. The click of the power button. The low mechanical buzz that grew louder as he lifted it toward her. Emma shook her head, begging without words. But they didn't hesitate. They grabbed her arms, pinning her against the wall. The razor touched the side of her head, and she screamed. They laughed. The more she struggled, the harder they held her. Clumps of hair fell to the concrete. She cried so hard she could barely breathe, twisting her body, trying to break free. But they were older, stronger, energized by the thrill of her terror. And then one of them pulled out a phone. The lens caught her tears, her shaking her humiliation. It captured her terror in trembling close-up as the razor carved uneven paths across her scalp. Her voice cracked raw from crying. She called out for help, but the school grounds were empty. After hours meant empty hallways, empty fields, empty windows. No one came. No one even heard her. The buzzing stopped when the oldest boy grew bored. They stepped back, letting her collapse to her knees. She tried to gather the fallen pieces of her hair, her hands shaking as though she could somehow undo what they had done. The boys ran off laughing, satisfied, proud of themselves. And the camera had recorded everything. Emma didn't know the video was already being sent from phone to phone, spreading through group chats before she'd even made it off school property. She didn't know that her worst moment had become entertainment. She didn't know that within hours her father would see it. Marcus felt the rage, then pure and molten, threatening to consume every rational thought. But Emma was still in his arms, still trembling, still needing him to be her father and not the fury building inside him. He pulled her close again, steadying her breath with his own. "You're safe now, baby. I promise you this stops today." Emma's fingers curled into his shirt, gripping the fabric like a lifeline. "Dad, please don't make it worse. I'm scared they won't touch you again. Ever. I swear on your mother's grave." He carried her inside, settled her on the couch, tucked a blanket around her shoulders despite the September warmth. Shock does strange things to the body, makes it forget how to regulate temperature. Emma's teeth chattered as she curled into the cushions. Marcus kissed her forehead, then stepped into the kitchen, his legs barely holding his weight. His phone sat on the counter where he'd left it that morning. Marcus picked it up with shaking hands, scrolled through his contacts, and stopped at a name he only called in moments that mattered. The dial tone rang once, twice. Then a voice answered gravelly and alert despite the late hour in whatever time zone he occupied. "Talk to me, brother." Jack Sullivan, nomad, chapter president of the Glacier Peak Hells Angels for 17 years. Marcus had known him for 28 since the day Marcus earned his patch at age 19. They'd ridden together, bled together, buried brothers together. Jack's voice could read weather in a single syllable, could tell when Marcus was calling about a bike repair or when the world was ending. Marcus swallowed hard, the words stuck in his throat. When they finally came, they were simple. "It's Emma." A pause, a long one. When Jack spoke again, his voice had dropped an octave, shedding the casual warmth and leaving only steel. "What happened?" Marcus told him. Not every detail, not the way she screamed, not the way the razor vibrated against her skin, not the way she ran home with her hair falling in clumps behind her, but enough, enough for Jack to understand, enough for the silence to fill the space between them heavier than before. "We're handling this." Jack's voice carried the weight of a vow. "You're not alone in this, Marcus. Not for one goddamn second." The call ended. Marcus knew what came next. Within minutes, the message would spread. First through his chapter, then through neighboring ones. Phones would ring in garages, in living rooms, at truck stops, and midnight diners. Men who had never met Emma would hear what had been done to her and wouldn't hesitate. Loyalty didn't require explanation in this world. It simply existed, absolute and unquestioning. Marcus's phone began buzzing, almost immediately. Messages, confirmations, questions that weren't really questions at all. "When do you need us? Where are we meeting? How fast should we ride?" These weren't men driven by the thrill of retaliation. These were men who understood an unspoken code that predated laws and institutions. A child had been harmed. A brother's daughter had been brutalized while adults looked away. And now the responsibility fell to them. By midnight, Marcus had received confirmation from over a dozen chapters. Brothers from Idaho were already packing their bikes, throwing gear into saddlebags, checking headlights, tightening bolts. Riders from Wyoming called to confirm routes and arrival times. A chapter president from South Dakota sent a text that simply read, "We ride at dawn, all of us." They didn't ask for justification. They didn't ask whether the school had been notified or if police were involved. They didn't care about the politics of administration or the excuses adults would surely try to hide behind. They cared about Emma. They cared that a little girl had been tortured while the people paid to protect her chose comfort over courage. They cared that Marcus, a man who would bend the world for his child, needed them. And by sunrise, the largest gathering of Hell's Angels this town had ever seen would arrive at the school's front gates. But Marcus wasn't calling them for revenge. He wasn't calling them to intimidate or threaten or burn everything to the ground. He was planning something far more powerful. He was planning accountability, visibility, a presence so unmistakable that the people who had ignored Emma's suffering would no longer be able to pretend they hadn't seen it. The hours passed in a strange suspension of time. Marcus stayed awake listening to the gentle breathing of his daughter in the next room, gripping his phone like a tether to sanity. With every message, every promise of support, every confirmation of a rider leaving home in the dead of night, his resolve deepened. This wasn't about fury anymore. This was about love. And when dawn finally touched the horizon, thin and pale, it would carry with it the first distant rumble of engines. But before dawn, before the thunder, there was the night. Emma had fallen into an exhausted sleep on the couch, her small body finally surrendering to the weight of trauma. Marcus covered her with another blanket and retreated to the kitchen table where Sarah's old laptop sat gathering dust. He opened it, typed in the password he'd kept unchanged for 2 years, and began searching for information he should have demanded months ago. Millbrook Elementary School's website featured glossy photos of smiling children and inspirational mission statements about fostering excellence and character. The faculty page showed Dr. Helen Cartwright's professional headshot, her biography listing a doctorate in educational administration and 8 years as principal. Another page detailed the school's anti-bullying policy, a document thick with jargon and procedure that meant nothing when no one enforced it. Marcus found the donor recognition page. His stomach turned. Richard Whitmore's name sat at the top of the platinum tier, $250,000 donated over the past 3 years. Catherine Hayes occupied the gold tier at $180,000. Dr. James Mills held a silver designation at 120,000. These weren't just generous donors. These were the people who kept the lights on, who funded new equipment, who made administrators' jobs possible. And their children could do no wrong because money in this equation bought more than facilities. It bought silence. A knock on the door startled Marcus from his spiral. He checked the time, 2:47 a.m. Through the window, he saw Jack's silhouette backlit by the street lamp. Marcus opened the door before Jack could knock again. They stood facing each other for a moment, and Jack's expression said everything words couldn't. He stepped inside, glanced toward the couch where Emma slept, then turned back to Marcus. How is she? Asleep, finally. She cried for an hour before exhaustion won. Jack's jaw worked, muscles tensing beneath weathered skin. The boys. You got names. Marcus pulled out his phone, showed Jack the notes he'd been keeping since January. Tyler Whitmore, 11 years old. Brandon Hayes, 11. Connor Mills, 10. Three fifth graders who'd terrorized a third grader for 8 months, while adults documented their complaints and did nothing. Their families own this town, Jack. The Whitmores run the biggest timber operation in Montana. The Hayes woman is a real estate lawyer, chairs the PTA. Mills is a dentist, loaded. They've bought their way out of accountability. Jack's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. A coldness that Marcus recognized from the old days before they'd settled into the quieter rhythms of middle age. Not anymore, they haven't. Money doesn't buy immunity when 300 witnesses show up. 300, Jack pulled out his own phone, scrolled through messages, turned the screen toward Marcus. Confirmations from chapters across 4 states. Riders were already on the road, headlights cutting through the darkness of rural highways. Some had left their homes at midnight. Others were leaving now in the dead hours before dawn. The message had spread beyond the immediate region, carried through networks of brotherhood that spanned the country. By sunrise, Millbrook, Montana would see something it had never seen before. Marcus felt something crack in his chest. Relief mixed with gratitude, mixed with the overwhelming recognition that he wasn't fighting this alone. Jack gripped his shoulder. Get some rest, brother. You're going to need your strength tomorrow. This isn't a short fight. This is the beginning of something bigger. After Jack left, Marcus tried to sleep but couldn't. He moved to the chair beside the couch, watching Emma's chest rise and fall, making sure each breath came steady and untroubled. Her face looked peaceful in sleep, innocent in a way that made the violence done to her feel even more obscene. Moonlight filtered through the window, casting shadows across her makeshift bed. One of her hands had slipped out from under the blanket, fingers still curled, as though gripping something invisible. At some point near dawn, Emma stirred. Her eyes opened, unfocused at first, then found Marcus in the chair. She didn't speak, just reached for him. Marcus moved to the couch, let her curl against his side, and wrapped his arm around her shoulders. They sat together in the pre-dawn quiet, watching through the window as the sky began its slow transition from black to gray. Dad? Her voice startled him. He'd thought she'd fallen back asleep. Yeah, baby. Are you going to do something bad? The question landed like a punch. Marcus chose his words carefully. I'm going to make sure you're safe. And I'm going to make sure the people who hurt you face consequences for what they did. That's not bad, Emma. That's justice. But what if they get mad at me? What if it gets worse? Marcus tilted her chin up, made sure she could see his eyes in the dim light. Listen to me. What happened to you is not your fault. Not one single piece of it. And it's not going to get worse because I'm going to make sure those boys never get near you again. You have my word. Emma nodded, but the doubt still clouded her features. She'd learned not to trust adults' promises. 8 months of broken faith had taught her that words meant nothing without action. Marcus understood that he'd have to prove himself through deeds, not declarations. And that proof was about to arrive with the sunrise. The first rumble reached them just before 7 a.m. Emma tensed against Marcus's side, her body going rigid with alarm at the unfamiliar sound. It started as a distant vibration so subtle it could have been mistaken for thunder, if not for its mechanical regularity. But it didn't fade. It grew layered, building with each passing second until the windows began to tremble in their frames. Marcus stood, walked to the window, and pulled back the curtain. Emma followed, climbing onto the couch to peer over the sill. Main Street stretched empty in the early morning light, but the sound was getting closer, unmistakable now. The deep-throated roar of motorcycles, not one or two, but a symphony of engines that made the air itself vibrate. Then they appeared. The first wave crested the rise at the end of Main Street, headlights cutting through the morning haze. 12 bikes in perfect V formation, their riders leaning into the turn with practiced synchronization. Behind them came another wave, and another. The line stretched back farther than Emma could see, disappearing around the curve where the highway fed into town. "Dad, what's happening?" Marcus knelt beside her, keeping his voice calm. "Those are friends, baby. They heard what happened to you, and they came to help. All of them. All of them." Emma watched transfixed as the procession continued. The bikes didn't speed or weave. They moved with military precision, maintaining formation and distance. Their presence overwhelming not through chaos, but through sheer disciplined force. Neighbors emerged onto their porches, coffee cups forgotten in their hands. A jogger stopped mid-stride, mouth slightly open. Mrs. Chen next door clutched her robe closed and stared as the seemingly endless line of motorcycles rolled past. The sound was deafening now, a wall of noise that drowned out everything else. Emma covered her ears, not from fear, but from sheer volume. Marcus could feel the vibration through the floor, up through his legs, resonating in his chest cavity. This was what 300 motorcycles sounded like when they moved as one. This was the sound of accountability, arriving in a town that had forgotten what it looked like. The procession turned toward the school. Marcus knew without checking the time that it was exactly 7 a.m., the hour they'd agreed upon. Not too early to seem like a night raid, but early enough to arrive before school officially opened, before students filled the halls. The message needed to be sent to adults first. Marcus's phone buzzed, a text from Jack. "We're here, all of us. No one's alone anymore." Emma looked up at her father, confusion and wonder mixing in her expression. "They came for me." Marcus felt his throat tighten. He managed to nod. "Yeah, baby. They came for you because you matter. Because what happened to you matters. And because the people who were supposed to protect you failed, these men decided they wouldn't." Tears welled in Emma's eyes, but these were different from yesterday's tears. Not tears of pain or fear or humiliation. These carried something else. Relief, maybe. Or the first tentative shoots of hope that she might actually be safe, that someone might actually care enough to stand between her and the cruelty she'd endured. Marcus pulled her close, let her cry against his shoulder, and watched through the window as the last of the motorcycles disappeared around the corner toward Millbrook Elementary School. The sound faded gradually, leaving behind a strange silence that felt heavier than the noise had been. In that silence, Marcus made a promise to himself and to his daughter. By the end of today, everyone would know what had been done to Emma Patterson, and everyone would understand that silence was no longer an option. The sound reached Millbrook Elementary School 3 minutes before the bikes themselves appeared. Dr. Helen Cartwright stood in the parking lot, her keys still dangling from the door of her silver Lexus, and felt the vibration before she heard it. A low-frequency rumble that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, building in intensity until car alarms began chirping in protest. She looked toward Main Street, confusion creasing her forehead, and then she saw them. The first wave of motorcycles turned onto School Road in perfect formation, headlights blazing despite the morning sun. Helen's keys slipped from her fingers, clattering on the asphalt. Behind the first 12 riders came another formation. Then another. The line seemed endless, a river of chrome and leather flowing toward the school with mechanical inevitability. Helen's hand fumbled for her phone, nearly dropping it twice before managing to dial. 911, what's your emergency? Her voice came out higher than intended, nearly cracking. This is Dr. Cartwright at Millbrook Elementary. We need police, immediately. There are hundreds of motorcycles surrounding the school. The dispatcher's response carried practiced calm that only heightened Helen's panic. Ma'am, we're aware. Multiple units are already responding. Have the bikers made any threats or attempted to enter school property? They're everywhere. They're circling the building. Ma'am, are they on school grounds or on public roads? Helen looked again. The motorcycles had formed a perfect perimeter around the school's boundary, their riders positioning themselves with military precision. Not one tire crossed the property line. Not one engine revved aggressively. They simply arranged themselves in an unbroken circle that stretched for nearly 3 miles around the entire campus. They're on the edge, just at the boundary. Then technically they're not breaking any laws yet. Officers will be there in 4 minutes. Please go inside and lock the doors. The call ended. Helen stood frozen watching as more bikes arrived, filling gaps in the circle until no space remained. 300 motorcycles. 300 men in leather vests bearing patches she recognized from crime documentaries. Hell's Angels. The words on their backs left no ambiguity about their affiliation. Her mind raced through possible explanations, landed on the most terrifying one, and rejected it because accepting it meant accepting culpability. Inside the school, Mrs. Patricia Morrison had arrived early to prepare lesson plans. The sound penetrated the building's brick walls, making the fluorescent lights flicker. Patricia set down her coffee, walked to the window, and immediately understood what Helen was still trying to deny. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. This was about Emma Patterson. Patricia's hands shook as she rushed back to her classroom. The locked drawer in her desk, the one she told herself was professional documentation, suddenly felt like evidence at a crime scene. She pulled out the spiral notebook, its cover worn from months of anxious handling. 147 pages of careful observations. 8 months of watching a child suffer while she convinced herself that recording it absolved her of the responsibility to stop it. The first entry, dated January 15th, described Tyler Whitmore calling Emma a freak during art class. Patricia had noted it with clinical detachment, as though documenting wildlife behavior rather than cruelty toward a grieving child. February 3rd recorded Emma's torn sketchbook, Tyler nearby, with a smirk. Patricia couldn't prove meant guilt, but knew in her gut did. March 12th detailed Emma coming to her in tears about being pushed, and Patricia's own response echoed back from the page like an accusation told her to toughen up. The entries grew worse as pages turned. April 20th marked the day Marcus Patterson came in to complain, and Patricia's handwriting revealed her internal conflict. Documented it, but what can I do? The Whitmores donated $250,000. She'd written the amount as though the number justified the silence. May 8th showed the milk incident, Brandon Hayes pouring his lunch drink on Emma's tray while Patricia watched and looked away. The words stared back at her, now undeniable proof that she'd seen and chosen in action. June 14th contained a note about Tyler planning something overhead in the hallway, but Patricia hadn't intervened. July 22nd referenced the TikTok video, 47 students mocking Emma online, and the principal's directive, don't make waves. September 10th, just 4 days ago, recorded Tyler talking about teaching the freak a lesson. Patricia had written, I should have. I didn't, the sentence trailing off into white space that screamed louder than any words could. She closed the notebook, pressed it against her chest, and realized she'd been building a case against herself. Every entry she'd thought would protect her career instead documented her failure to protect a child. The motorcycles outside weren't here by accident. They were here because adults like her had made them necessary. The roar of engines crescendoed, then abruptly ceased. 300 motorcycles falling silent in synchronized precision created a vacuum of sound more unsettling than the noise had been. Patricia looked out the window again and saw the riders dismounting, standing beside their bikes in perfect stillness. They didn't approach the building. They didn't shout or gesture. They simply stood there, arms crossed, waiting. The message was clear. We're not going anywhere until this is made right. Police cruisers arrived with sirens wailing, screeching into the parking lot with the aggressive energy of law enforcement expecting trouble. Chief Robert Martinez stepped out of the lead vehicle, his hand resting on his belt near his weapon, but not quite touching it. 8 officers fanned out behind him, including Officer Derek Thompson, whose expression carried something different from the others. Not confrontational preparation, but grim resolve. Chief Martinez walked directly toward the largest man in the circle, a gray-bearded rider whose vest identified him as chapter president. Jack Sullivan met him halfway, hands visible, an empty posture, relaxed but immovable. Jack, Martinez's voice carried the weariness of a man who dealt with this particular biker too many times to waste energy on posturing. Chief, what's this about? Jack's response came measured, each word deliberate. You know what this is about, Chief. A little girl was assaulted on these grounds yesterday, while adults who get paid to protect children stood by and watched. We're here to make sure that gets addressed. Martinez's jaw tightened. He glanced toward Derek Thompson, who stepped forward with a phone in his hand. Chief, you need to see this. The video played on the small screen, but its impact filled the space between them. 72 seconds of brutality captured in high definition. Emma's screams, the buzz of the razor, 3 boys laughing. Derek's voice dropped low. My son was in the group chat where this got shared. 47 kids saw this, chief. 47. And not one adult at this school did anything about it until 300 bikers showed up. Martinez watched the video twice, his expression hardening with each viewing. When it finished, he turned back to Jack. You planning violence? No, sir. We're planning accountability. We're staying until that happens, however long it takes. The chief studied the formation of bikers, the disciplined arrangement that suggested military training more than criminal intent. Every rider stood at ease, no weapons visible, no aggressive posturing. Just presence. Overwhelming, undeniable presence. How long you willing to stay? Jack's answer came without hesitation. As long as it takes. Martinez made a decision that would define his career. He turned to his officers, raised his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Set up a perimeter. Nobody interferes with these men unless they break the law. Which they haven't. Officer Thompson stepped forward, extended his hand to Jack. The gesture wasn't lost on the watching crowd. My kid showed me that video last night. What those boys did, that's felony assault on a minor. We have the evidence. It's going to the DA today. The shift in energy was palpable. The bikers hadn't come to break laws or terrorize anyone. They'd come to hold a mirror up to a system that had failed, and that system was finally being forced to look at its own reflection. Marcus Patterson arrived at 7:45, driving his pickup instead of his Harley because Emma was with him. She'd insisted on coming, needed to see that her father wasn't facing this alone. Marcus parked away from the main lot, helped Emma from the truck, and was immediately flanked by three men who'd been waiting for him. Jack clapped a hand on his shoulder. Tiny Rodriguez, 6'5" and 280 pounds of gentle giant, knelt down to Emma's level. Hey there, little miss, we got your back today, all right? Nobody's gonna hurt you ever again. Emma nodded, unable to speak, but her hand found Marcus's and gripped tight. The fourth man, Rev McKenzie, had been a Baptist preacher before his life took a left turn into the brotherhood. He still carried that pastoral calm, that ability to radiate safety in crisis. Emma, would it be okay if we walked with you and your dad? We won't go inside if you don't want us to. But we're here however you need us. Emma looked up at Marcus, silently asking permission. He squeezed her hand. It's up to you, baby. She considered, then nodded. The five of them walked toward the school entrance, Marcus and Emma in front, the three bikers forming a protective triangle behind them. Secretary Linda Hayes sat at the front desk, no relation to Brandon Hayes, but aware enough to recognize the storm that had arrived. Her eyes widened as they entered. Marcus's voice carried none of the rage boiling beneath his surface. Cold clarity served him better now. I'm here to see Dr. Cartwright. Immediately. Linda didn't argue, didn't make excuses about schedules or appointments. She simply picked up her phone, pressed a button, and spoke three words. They're here, Helen. The walk to the principal's office lasted 15 seconds, but felt like crossing a continent. Helen Cartwright stood behind her desk, one hand pressed flat against the wood surface as though steadying herself. Her face had lost most of its color. Marcus stepped inside first, positioning himself between Emma and him and the woman who'd systematically ignored his daughter's suffering for 8 months. Jack, Tiny, and Rev filled the doorway, not threatening, but unmistakably present. Helen's attempt at authority crumbled before she finished speaking. Mr. Patterson, I understand you're upset, but this intimidation is completely inappropriate. Marcus pulled out his phone, placed it on Helen's desk, and pressed play. Emma's voice filled the office, tinny, through the small speaker, but devastating in its terror. Please stop, it hurts. The buzz of the razor, laughter from the boys. 72 seconds that demolished any pretense of misunderstanding or communication breakdown. When it ended, silence held the room hostage. Helen's face had gone from pale to gray. Marcus's voice came out cold enough to frost windows. That's my 8-year-old daughter being tortured by three boys who've been terrorizing her for 8 months. 8 months during which I filed 3 formal complaints with your office. What happened to those complaints, Dr. Cartwright? Helen's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound emerged. Jack's voice rumbled from the doorway. We can wait all day for an answer, ma'am. We've got nowhere else to be. The words broke something in Helen's composure. She collapsed into her chair, hands coming up to cover her face, and when she spoke, the carefully maintained professional facade shattered completely. I didn't want this. You have to understand, I didn't want any of this. But the Whitmores, the Hayes family, they fund this school. Half our budget comes from their donations. When you filed those complaints, I brought them to the board. They told me to handle it quietly, not to make waves. Richard Whitmore threatened to pull all funding if his son faced serious discipline. Catherine Hayes said her lawyers would sue us into bankruptcy. I thought if I just documented everything, kept records, it would be enough to cover. She trailed off, realizing too late what she'd admitted. Jack's response came quiet but cut like a blade. So you sacrificed a child to protect your budget. Helen's hands dropped to her desk, tears streaming freely now. I didn't know it would go this far. I thought if I just kept them separated as much as possible, if I monitored them closely, I could prevent something serious from happening. I never imagined they'd... Marcus leaned forward, palms flat on the desk, bringing his face level with hers. You never imagined they'd escalate. When bullies face no consequences, they always escalate. That's not psychology, that's basic human behavior. You knew better. You chose money over my daughter's safety. The intercom on Helen's desk buzzed. Linda's voice crackled through. Dr. Cartwright, the school board has convened an emergency meeting. They're requesting your presence in the conference room, along with Mr. Patterson and his representatives. Jack smiled without warmth. Looks like accountability just arrived in a conference room, folks. Shall we? The conference room could comfortably seat 12. 23 people crowded inside within 10 minutes, creating a pressure cooker atmosphere, thick with anxiety and barely contained rage. The 5 school board members sat along one side of the table, their body language ranging from defensive to openly hostile. Richard Whitmore occupied the end seat, his expensive suit and manicured appearance radiating the confidence of a man accustomed to buying his way out of problems. Catherine Hayes sat beside him, flanked by 2 lawyers in matching Navy suits. Dr. James Mills took a chair away from the others, his posture slumped and defeated in a way that suggested he already knew how this would end. Marcus, Jack, Tiny, and Rev stood along the back wall. Emma sat in a chair near her father, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the table. District Attorney Lisa Chen entered last, carrying a leather briefcase that landed on the table with decisive weight. She was 42, Taiwanese American, and had a reputation for prosecuting cases that other DAs considered too politically complicated. This case was about to become her signature. Richard Whitmore spoke first, his voice carrying the aggressive certainty of inherited wealth. This is absolutely outrageous. You're allowing a motorcycle gang to terrorize our school, to intimidate faculty and parents. My lawyers will be filing injunctions by end of business today. This is harassment, pure and simple. Lisa Chen didn't let him finish warming up. Mr. Whitmore, before your lawyers waste more of your money, I need you to watch something. She connected her laptop to the projector. The video filled the wall-mounted screen in brutal clarity. 72 seconds stretched into eternity under the conference room's fluorescent lights. Every scream echoed, every laugh cut. When it ended, the silence felt like a physical presence. Lisa's voice carried prosecutorial precision. That's your son, Tyler, committing felony assault and battery on a minor. That's Brandon Hayes restraining the victim. That's Connor Mills filming and distributing the evidence. All 3 boys are over 10 years old, which means under Montana law, they can be charged as juveniles with serious offenses. The video was distributed to 47 students, which adds potential charges of harassment and distribution of exploitation material involving a minor. Catherine Hayes found her voice, though it lacked its earlier confidence. They're children. They made a terrible mistake. Surely there's a way to handle this that doesn't involve criminal charges. Lisa turned to face her directly. They planned this assault. They brought a professional clipper to school. They held an 8-year-old girl down while she screamed for help. They filmed it for entertainment and distributed it for social approval. That's not a mistake, Mrs. Hayes. That demonstrates criminal intent, planning, and execution. Your son's age doesn't erase those facts. Officer Thompson stood from his position near the door, dropped a spiral notebook on the table. The pages fanned open, revealing handwritten entries dated across 8 months. Mrs. Patricia Morrison, who'd been sitting silent and hunched in the corner, let out a small sound of distress. Derek's voice carried the disappointment of a man who'd expected better from educators. 147 pages of documented incidents. Mrs. Morrison recorded everything. Every push, every insult, every complaint from Mr. Patterson. She watched Emma Patterson suffer for 8 months and did absolutely nothing except write about it. A board member, Sarah Kim, picked up the notebook, flipping through pages with growing horror. Her voice shook when she spoke. Patricia, is this real? You documented all of this and never reported it up the chain. Patricia's response came barely above a whisper. Dr. Cartwright told me not to make waves. The Whitmores threatened my job if I pursued formal discipline against Tyler. I thought if I kept records, if something happened, I'd have proof that I'd been trying to monitor the situation. Marcus's control finally cracked. Not into violence, but into raw anguish that hit harder than any physical outburst could. You watched my daughter suffer so you could protect your mom. You turned her pain into documentation for your own career insurance. Rev's hand landed on Marcus's shoulder, steadying him. The gesture spoke volumes about the kind of men who'd shown up today. Men who understood that sometimes strength meant holding someone back from their own justified rage. The door opened again. Dr. James Mills stood, his movement drawing every eye. The room fell silent as he walked to the center of the floor, positioning himself where everyone could see him. His voice cracked on the first word. I need to say something, and I need everyone to hear it. Catherine Hayes reached out as if to stop him. James, don't. No, I'm done hiding. He turned to face Marcus directly, tears already streaming down his face. Mr. Patterson, my son Connor has been in therapy for 18 months. Since he was 9 years old. He has behavioral issues, anger management problems. Our therapist identified early markers of conduct disorder. She warned us he was at high risk for escalating aggression. And instead of getting him intensive help, instead of taking her warning seriously, I threw money at this school. I donated to building funds. I contributed to programs. I convinced myself that my generosity would somehow balance out my son's problems, that it would buy him protection from consequences. His voice broke completely, but he forced himself to continue. I knew Connor was capable of hurting someone. I knew it, and I prioritized my reputation, my pride, my fear of admitting my son needed serious intervention. And because I failed him, because I chose wealth over responsibility, he participated in torturing your daughter. James dropped into a chair, shoulders shaking with sobs. The raw honesty of it created a rupture in the room's dynamic. Villains were easier to fight than broken fathers admitting culpability. Marcus felt his rage stumble, caught between the man James was confessing to being and the harm his inaction had caused. Jack's hand squeezed Marcus's shoulder, a silent reminder to breathe, to think, to recognize that accountability didn't always arrive wrapped in satisfying packages. Lisa Chen used the moment to assert control, her voice cutting through the emotional turbulence. Based on the evidence presented, I'm recommending the following actions. Tyler Whitmore and Brandon Hayes will face immediate expulsion from Millbrook Elementary and juvenile charges for assault, battery, and distribution of harmful material. Connor Mills will receive a 6-month suspension with mandatory intensive therapy, considering his documented mental health struggles and his father's acknowledgement. However, failure to complete treatment or any further incidents will result in expulsion and charges. She turned to Patricia Morrison. Mrs. Morrison, you're suspended pending a full investigation. Your teaching license will undergo review by the state board. If this notebook proves you witnessed assault and failed to report it, you'll lose that license permanently. Patricia's soft crying provided background noise as Lisa continued. Dr. Cartwright, you're on immediate administrative leave. A state investigator will conduct a comprehensive review of your handling of bullying complaints. You will not return to this building until that investigation concludes. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Sarah Kim spoke up, her voice carrying new steel. And what about the donations, the funding that apparently bought silence? Lisa smiled without warmth. I'm glad you asked. The Whitmore and Hayes family donations will be returned in full. Every dollar. Consider it a severance of your obligation to their influence. This school will operate on merit and safety, not on which families write the biggest checks. Richard Whitmore shot to his feet, face reddening. You can't do that. We have contracts, agreements. Your agreements didn't include purchasing immunity for your children to assault other students, Mr. Whitmore. Take it up with your lawyers. I'm sure they'll explain how badly criminal charges against your son will play alongside civil suits from the Patterson family. The fight drained out of Richard in visible stages. Catherine Hayes looked down at her hands. Dr. James Mills continued crying quietly. The board members began whispering among themselves, recognizing that the foundation they'd built their institution upon had just been revealed as rotten. Jack leaned close to Marcus, voice low. "Brother, you want to say anything?" Marcus looked at Emma, still sitting quietly, taking everything in with those two old eyes. He looked at the adults around the table, some broken, some defensive, all complicit. He thought about revenge, about grinding them into dust, about making them hurt the way his daughter had hurt. Then he thought about what Emma needed, what would actually help her heal. "I want my daughter to be safe. I want every child in this building to be safe. I want policies that actually protect kids instead of protecting donors. And I want accountability that sticks, not just promises that fade when everyone stops paying attention." Sarah Kim nodded, pulling out a tablet. "Mr. Patterson will draft a comprehensive anti-bullying policy by tomorrow. 3-strike system with mandatory reporting. First offense warning, parent conference, conflict resolution. Second offense, suspension and counseling referral. Third offense, expulsion hearing. No exceptions, no special treatment." Another board member, David Ochoa, spoke up. He'd been quiet throughout, watching everything with the careful attention of someone evaluating disaster. "I'd like to volunteer to chair the policy committee. And Mr. Patterson, I'd like your input every step of the way, not as a courtesy, but as a requirement." The meeting continued for another hour, hammering out details, assigning responsibilities, establishing oversight mechanisms that should have existed from the beginning. Outside, the 300 bikers remained in formation, their silent presence a reminder that this wasn't over just because people in a conference room made promises. When the meeting finally ended, Marcus walked Emma out through the main entrance. The morning sun had climbed higher, warming the September air. The circle of motorcycles still surrounded the school riders, standing patient and unmoved. As Marcus and Emma emerged, Jack raised his hand in signal. 300 engines started simultaneously, the coordinated rumble shaking windows and sending a flock of crows scattering from nearby trees. But they didn't leave. Jack walked over to Marcus, knelt down to Emma's level again. "Emma, we came a long way to make sure you're safe, and we're not leaving until we know you feel safe coming back to school. So here's what's going to happen. Some of us are going to take turns being here every morning and every afternoon. Not to scare anyone, just to make sure kids like you know somebody's got your back. Would that be okay?" Emma looked at her father, then back at Jack. Her voice came small but steady. "You'd really do that for me," Tiny answered from behind Jack. "Kiddo, we'd ride through a hurricane for you. Showing up at school pickup is easy." Something shifted in Emma's expression. Not happiness exactly, but the first flicker of safety, of believing that maybe the world contained more protectors than predators. She nodded. The next 3 weeks established a rhythm that transformed Millbrook Elementary. Every morning, 4 to 6 bikers stood at the school entrance. They didn't crowd or intimidate. They simply existed as visible proof that vulnerable children had allies. Emma was the first to walk in with them, but she wasn't the last. Within a week, 12 other students had started gravitating toward the Guardians, as a first grader had named them in a drawing that went viral on local social media. The bikers organized anti-bullying workshops, telling hard stories about consequences and choices. They set up a hotline that bypassed school administration, giving kids a direct line to adults who would actually listen. They funded a scholarship called Emma's Promise for students who showed courage in adversity, and they kept their word about presence. Every single day, rain or shine, motorcycles idled in the parking lot during pickup. Not aggressive, not threatening, just there. A promise kept in chrome and leather. Marcus stood watching from his truck one afternoon 3 weeks after the confrontation. Emma walked out with Mia Chen, Jordan Parker, and Lily Tran, her new friends, all of them laughing about something in the way children laugh when they feel safe enough to just be children. Her hair had started growing back, soft fuzz covering the patches that had been scraped raw. She waved at Tiny as she passed, and the massive biker waved back with surprising gentleness. Jack walked over to Marcus's truck, leaned against the door. "She's doing better." Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. "You know this is bigger than one kid now, right? We've had 3 other schools ask us to help set up similar programs. The Guardian Initiative. It's spreading. You're changing how this works, Jack. All of you." Jack shrugged, uncomfortable with praise. "We're just showing up. Somebody should have been showing up for these kids all along. We're just filling the space that was always supposed to be filled. Emma reached the truck, climbed in with her backpack, and Marcus saw something in her face he hadn't seen in months. Not just safety, not just the absence of fear, but something approaching actual joy. She'd survived. And in surviving, she'd learned that she mattered enough for 300 strangers to cross state lines just to stand beside her. That lesson Marcus knew would define her more than the trauma ever could. Emma stood in front of the bathroom mirror on Monday morning, 3 days after 300 motorcycles had encircled her school like a protective shield. Her reflection stared back with uncertainty, one hand touching the purple beanie Marcus had bought her the day before. The soft cotton felt strange against her nearly bare scalp, but better than the exposure she'd felt walking through the house without it. Marcus appeared in the doorway behind her, his own reflection meeting hers in the glass. "You don't have to go back yet, baby. Not if you're not ready." Emma adjusted the beanie, tucking a few uneven wisps underneath. Her voice came stronger than she expected. "I want to go, Dad. I'm tired of hiding." The drive to school stretched both too long and too short simultaneously. Marcus kept glancing at Emma in the passenger seat, watching her fingers twist the hem of her shirt, untwist, then twist again. When they pulled into the parking lot, 6 motorcycles already occupied the spaces nearest the entrance. Jack stood beside his Harley, Tiny beside him, Rev and 3 others, forming a casual semicircle that somehow felt like a fortress. Jack approached as Emma climbed from the truck, dropping to one knee so they were eye level. "Morning, Emma. We're going to walk you in today if that's all right, just to make sure everyone knows you're not alone." Emma nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. The walk from parking lot to entrance felt like crossing an ocean. Students arriving early stopped to stare. Some whispered. Others just watched with expressions Emma couldn't quite read. The bikers formed a loose V behind her, and Marcus not crowding, but unmistakably present. When they reached the front doors, a woman Emma didn't recognize waited inside. Rachel Foster was 28, fresh from graduate school, and had taken the position specifically after reading about Emma's case in the Millbrook Gazette. Her smile was genuine, reaching her eyes in a way that made Emma's shoulders drop half an inch from where they'd been hunched near her ears. "Emma, I'm Ms. Foster. I'll be your teacher this year. I've heard you're an incredible artist. Would you maybe show me your sketchbook sometime? I'd love to see your work." Something in the directness, the lack of pity or excessive sympathy, allowed Emma to find her voice. "Okay, I mostly draw birds." "Birds are wonderful, complex creatures. Takes real skill to capture them." Marcus kissed Emma's forehead, his lips lingering a moment longer than necessary. "I'll be right here at 3 o'clock, and they'll be outside." He gestured toward the bikers who'd already begun walking back to their posts. Emma watched them go, then turned and followed Ms. Foster into the classroom. 22 students were already seated, conversations dying as Emma entered. She felt their eyes tracking her movement to an empty desk near the window. The purple beanie suddenly felt conspicuous, a neon sign announcing her difference. A girl with dark braids in the adjacent seat leaned over, voice soft. "I like your beanie. Purple's my favorite color too." "I'm Mia." Emma managed a small smile. "Thanks, I'm Emma." "I know, I'm glad you're okay." The simplicity of it, the lack of probing questions or performative concern, let something ease in Emma's chest. Ms. Foster began the lesson, and Emma found herself able to focus on fractions instead of the whispers she imagined behind her back. By lunch, exhaustion had settled into her bones, but she'd survived the morning. That counted for something. The cafeteria proved harder. The noise, the crowd, the memories of milk spilled on her tray, and laughter following her to the trash bins made her hands shake as she carried her lunch toward an empty table. Then Mia appeared at her elbow. "Want to sit with me and my friends Jordan and Lily are pretty cool." Emma followed Mia to a table where 2 other kids sat. Jordan had short hair and wore a graphic tee featuring a spaceship. Lily was tiny with dark eyes that held the same wariness Emma recognized in her own mirror. They didn't ask about what happened. They talked about the latest Pixar movie and whether cats were better than dogs and which teacher gave the most homework. Normal things. Safe things. Wednesday brought Emma's first panic attack at school. A door slammed in the hallway during math, the sharp crack echoing off tile floors. Emma's vision tunneled, her breath coming in short gasps that couldn't seem to reach her lungs. The classroom tilted. Foster was beside her immediately, voice calm and low. "Emma, come with me." Everyone else keep working on problem 7. In the quiet of the hallway, Miss Foster sat on the floor back against the lockers and patted the space beside her. Emma sank down, still struggling to breathe. Miss Foster didn't touch her, didn't crowd her. Just breathed deliberately audibly until Emma's rhythm began to match hers. You don't have to explain. Just breathe with me. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. They sat there for 10 minutes until Emma's heartbeat stopped, trying to escape her ribcage. Ms. Foster's voice remained steady. Trauma does that sometimes, makes our bodies remember even when our minds want to move forward. It's not weakness, it's just healing taking its time. Emma wiped her eyes with her sleeve. I thought I was getting better. You are getting better. Better doesn't mean perfect. It means you're still showing up even when it's hard. That takes more courage than most adults have. By the second week, Emma had started drawing again. Small sketches, at first doodles in the margins of her homework, that Ms. Foster never mentioned except to occasionally pause beside Emma's desk and nod appreciatively. Then one afternoon, Emma opened her sketchbook to a fresh page and drew a phoenix rising from Ash's wings, spread wide feathers rendered in careful detail that took her 3 class periods to complete. Ms. Foster asked permission to display it on the classroom's art wall. Emma hesitated, remembering Tyler destroying her previous work, but something had shifted. Those boys were gone. Their absence had created space for Emma to exist without constantly monitoring threats. She nodded. 4 classmates approached after school, crowding around the displayed drawing with genuine admiration. Emma, that's incredible. Could you teach me how to do feathers like that? The shading is so good. How did you learn? My mom draws birds. She'd love this. Emma felt heat rise to her cheeks, but it was pleasant heat pride mixing with surprise. Her voice came shy but present. My mom taught me, before she died. One of the kids, a boy named Carlos, nodded seriously. My grandpa died last year. He taught me woodworking. I still make stuff he showed me how to do. It's like keeping them here, you know. Emma did know, and saying it out loud, acknowledging her mother's presence in her art, felt like opening a window in a room that had been sealed too long. The sessions with Dr. Susan Rodriguez started in week 3. Susan came recommended by Tiny, who'd seen her for PTSD after 2 tours in Afghanistan. Her office occupied the 2nd floor of a converted Victorian house, walls painted soft gray furniture, comfortable without being clinical. Dr. Rodriguez was 43, Latina, with a directness that Emma appreciated. Emma, I'm not going to make you talk about things before you're ready, but I want you to know that what happened to you wasn't your fault. Not one single piece of it. People who are hurting sometimes hurt others. That doesn't excuse it, but it explains it. Tyler and Brandon and Connor all had their own pain. They chose to inflict it on someone smaller. That's on them, not you. Emma twisted her hands in her lap. But why me? What did I do wrong? You did nothing wrong. Bullies don't choose victims based on what the victim did. They choose based on who seems vulnerable, who won't have powerful protectors. You'd lost your mom. You were quiet. You were everything they thought they could target without consequences. But there were consequences, eventually. Rodriguez leaned forward slightly. Because your father fought for you. Because 300 people you'd never met decided you mattered. But Emma, those consequences should have come from the school the first time you reported. The fact that it took motorcycles and viral videos and criminal charges, that's a failure of the system, not a reflection on you. Over the following weeks, sessions peeled back layers Emma hadn't known she'd been carrying. Guilt about not fighting back harder. Shame about crying so easily. Fear that the bad things happened because something inside her was fundamentally broken. Dr. Rodriguez dismantled each false belief with patient, evidence-based conversation that treated Emma like an intelligent human being capable of understanding nuance. The boys who hurt you, particularly Connor, he was diagnosed with conduct disorder. That's a mental health condition. It doesn't excuse his actions, but it means his brain processes empathy and consequences differently than most people. His father knew he needed intensive help and didn't get it for him. That's Dr. Mills's failure, not Connor's inherent evil. Emma absorbed this information carefully, processing the idea that someone could do terrible things without being entirely terrible. So he was sick. In a way, yes, but sick people can still cause real harm. Acknowledging someone's mental health doesn't erase the damage they did. It just adds context. This concept would matter more 5 weeks later when Dr. James Mills requested permission to bring Connor to deliver a written apology. Marcus initially refused, protective instinct overriding everything else, but Dr. Rodriguez suggested letting Emma decide. Emma thought for 3 days before answering. I want to read what he wrote, but I don't want to see him. Dr. Mills delivered the letter himself, handing it to Marcus in an envelope that trembled in his grip. Marcus read it first, checking for anything that might cause more harm. The handwriting was messy words, sometimes scratched out and rewritten, evidence of genuine struggle. Dear Emma, I'm sorry for hurting you. My dad says sorry isn't enough, and he's right. What I did was evil. I was angry at everything in my life, and I made you suffer for it. That's not okay, and I don't have excuses. I'm in therapy now, learning why my brain makes me want to hurt people when I feel bad. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know I'm trying to be better. You didn't deserve any of it. You never did anything wrong. Connor. Emma read it twice, sitting on her bed with Marcus beside her. When she finished, she folded it carefully and placed it in her nightstand drawer. Dad, do I have to write back? Absolutely not. You don't owe him anything, baby. Not forgiveness, not acknowledgement, nothing. What if I want to? Later, I mean. Not now, but maybe someday. Marcus pulled her close. Then that's your choice. Both are okay. Forgiving is okay. Not forgiving is okay. There's no wrong answer except doing what someone else thinks you should do instead of what you need. The letter stayed in the drawer, checked occasionally, like Emma was making sure it hadn't changed or disappeared. She never wrote back, but she also never threw it away. De Rodriguez called it healthy compartmentalization, holding space for complexity without demanding immediate resolution. Millbrook itself was transforming in ways that rippled beyond Emma's individual recovery. Principal David Ochoa, former elementary counselor who'd lobbied for the position after Helen Cartwright's suspension, implemented the three-strike policy with teeth. First week under new leadership, a fourth grader pushed a second grader on the playground. Strike one came with an immediate parent conference and a written letter of apology supervised by the counselor. The fourth grader's mother tried to dismiss it as normal roughhousing. Mrs. Buzz Peterson, your son pushed another child hard enough to leave bruises. That's not roughhousing. That's assault. He gets one warning. The next incident results in suspension. We're not negotiating. Word spread fast that the new principal meant business. Bullying incidents dropped 73% in the first 2 months. Not because children suddenly became angels, but because consequences now arrive swiftly and consistently, regardless of whose parents wrote checks. The Hells Angels Guardian Initiative expanded beyond anyone's initial expectations. Chapters from Oregon to the Dakotas reached out to Jack, requesting information about implementation. By December 47, chapters had adopted versions of the program standing watch at elementary schools in small towns where vulnerable children now walk through entrances flanked by leather-clad protectors. A documentary crew arrived in Millbrook in October, filming interviews with Marcus, Emma, Jack, and several other children who'd started using the Guardian escorts. The footage would eventually air on a streaming platform titled The Unexpected Protectors, sparking national conversation about community-based intervention in bullying. Emma participated in the interview, reluctantly agreeing only after Dr. Rodriguez suggested it might help other children feel less alone. Sitting in front of cameras made her stomach churn, but she forced words out. I thought nobody cared. For 8 months, I thought I was the problem. But then all these people showed up, people who didn't even know me, and they cared so much they rode through the night just to stand outside my school. That changed everything, not just for me, but for other kids too. Now I know there are more good people than bad people. You just have to find them. The clip went viral, 20 million views in a week. Emma's purple beanie became recognizable. Children at other schools wearing purple in solidarity. Marcus watched the view count climb and felt pride war with protectiveness. His daughter hadn't asked to be a symbol, but she'd survived something that broke many adults, and if her survival helped others, maybe that transformed trauma into meaning. By March, 6 months after the assault, Emma's hair had grown past her ears. Soft waves caught sunlight through the classroom window, no longer patchy but full and healthy. She'd started experimenting with styles, sometimes braiding it, sometimes leaving it loose. occasionally still choosing the purple beanie because she liked it, not because she needed to hide. Her artwork evolved from wounded birds to birds in flight. The local coffee shop, Millbrook Perk, asked to display 6 pieces on consignment. Emma's hands shook as she helped Marcus hang them price tags reading $25 each. Within a week, all 6 sold. Emma donated the money to the county animal shelter, explaining to Marcus that helping something vulnerable felt important. Friendships deepened. Mia, Jordan, and Lily became constant presences, their laughter filling the Patterson house on weekends. They formed an unofficial art club meeting at the library Saturday mornings to draw and talk and exist in that particular space of late childhood where imaginations still run wild, but self-awareness begins creeping in. Jordan came out as non-binary during one of these sessions, voice shaking with nervous energy. Emma set down her pencil and said the only words that mattered. Cool. Does that change your pronouns, or should I keep using they, them? Still they, them. I just wanted you to know. Okay, want to see the hawk I'm drawing? The casual acceptance, the lack of drama or interrogation meant more to Jordan than any speech could have. Later, Jordan's mother would call Marcus in tears, thanking him for raising a daughter who made space for people to be themselves. Marcus passed the phone to Emma, who listened to Mrs. Parker's gratitude with confused grace. I didn't do anything special. Jordan's my friend. Exactly, sweetheart. Exactly. March also brought the school assembly where Emma would speak. Principal Ochoa had asked her in February if she'd be willing to share her story with the whole student body. Emma's immediate response was absolute refusal. Public speaking terrified her. Being the center of attention made her want to disappear. But Dr. Rodriguez suggested considering it not as performance, but as testimony, a chance to tell her truth on her terms. Emma thought about it for 3 weeks before saying yes. Ms. Foster helped her prepare remarks, editing without censoring, maintaining Emma's voice while giving structure to her message. The night before the assembly, Emma practiced in front of Marcus 17 times, her voice growing steadier with each repetition. The gymnasium filled with students from kindergarten through 5th grade, teachers lining the walls, Principal Ochoa at the podium, introducing Emma with simple words. We have among us someone very brave. Emma Patterson is going to share something important. I want everyone to listen with respect. Emma walked to the podium, purple beanie on her head, hands gripping her note cards hard enough to crease them. Looking out at 200 faces made her breath catch. Then she spotted Mia in the 3rd row, Jordan beside her, Lily offering a thumbs up. Emma found her voice. Hi, I'm Emma. Last September, something really bad happened to me here at school. 3 older boys hurt me. For a long time before that, they'd been hurting me in smaller ways. I told adults, and the adults didn't help. I started thinking maybe it was my fault. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I deserved it. She paused, checking her cards, then decided to put them down. But here's what I learned. When bad things happen to you, it's not your fault just because someone says it is. Adults aren't always right. Sometimes they're scared or selfish or lazy. Sometimes they fail you. And when that happens, you have to find other people who won't fail you. My dad didn't fail me. The bikers who showed up didn't fail me. My new teacher and my friends didn't fail me. There are more good people than bad people in the world. But good people have to be braver than bad people. They have to stand up even when it's uncomfortable. A 4th grader's hand shot up. Emma hadn't planned for questions, but Principal Ochoa nodded encouragement. Yes. Did the boys who hurt you get in trouble? Emma considered the question carefully. They got expelled. Some are in counseling. One is working to understand why he hurts people. Is that enough? I don't know. But it's something, it's consequences. And that matters because before they thought they could hurt people without anything happening to them. Another hand, a 1st grader this time. Are you still set? Emma's throat tightened. Honesty felt important. Sometimes healing isn't a straight line. Some days are hard, but I'm mostly okay now. I have people who care about me. That makes everything easier. The assembly ended with standing applause that made Emma's cheeks burn. 4 students approached her afterward, each waiting until the crowd dispersed. They spoke quietly, sharing their own stories of being targeted, thanked Emma for making them feel less alone. One 2nd grader, a boy named Marcus, noticed, was small for his age and wore thick glasses, looked up at Emma with desperate hope. Does it really get better? I keep telling myself it will, but I don't know if I believe it. Emma knelt down, bringing herself to his level the way so many adults had done for her. It got better for me. That doesn't mean it magically fixed itself. People had to fight for it to get better. But yeah, it can get better. You just can't give up before it does. The boy nodded, something shifting in his expression from hopeless to hopeful. Emma watched him walk away and felt something new, something she didn't have a word for yet but would later understand as purpose. Her pain could be transformed into protection for others. That didn't erase the pain, but it gave it meaning beyond suffering. June arrived with Montana summer heat and the peculiar energy of an academic year ending. Emma had gained 7 pounds since September, her appetite returning as anxiety released its grip on her stomach. She smiled more, laughed more, moved through the world with shoulders back instead of hunched forward in protective anticipation. Her hair had grown to shoulder-length, thick and blonde and healthy. Sometimes Emma would run her fingers through it, marveling at the simple fact of its existence. The bald patches were memory now, replaced by hair that held barrettes and headbands, and sometimes nothing at all because Emma no longer needed to hide. On the last day of school, Miss Foster pulled Emma aside. "I want you to know something. You came into this classroom in September afraid and hurting. You're leaving it strong and whole. I'm incredibly proud of the work you've done, Emma. Your healing wasn't passive. You fought for it." Emma felt tears threatening. "You helped. You listened when other teachers didn't. That's my job. But you did the actual work. Don't forget that." Summer stretched ahead with possibility. Emma spent mornings drawing, afternoons at the library with her friends, evenings helping Marcus in the garage, while they talked about everything and nothing. The rhythms of normal life, once taken for granted, now felt precious because Emma understood how quickly normal could be destroyed. Marcus watched his daughter heal with gratitude so profound it sometimes stopped him mid-task. He'd be elbow deep in an engine rebuild, glance up to see Emma sketching in the doorway, and have to pause because the simple fact of her contentment overwhelmed him. She'd survived. More than survived. She'd transformed herself from victim to survivor to something beyond either label. She was just Emma, drawing birds and laughing with friends and planning her art club's summer projects. One Sunday evening in late June, Marcus sat on the couch exhausted from a long day of motorcycle maintenance for a customer's vintage Harley. The television flickered with some show he wasn't really watching, his mind drifting through the week ahead. Then he heard footsteps, soft but purposeful. Emma appeared in the doorway, backlit by the hallway lamp, her hair catching light in a way that made Marcus's chest ache with love and loss because she looked so much like Sarah in that moment. Emma walked over without speaking, climbed onto the couch and curled into Marcus's side with the ease of a child who knows she's safe. Marcus wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close, feeling the steady rhythm of her breathing. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who've survived something terrible together. Emma's hand found Marcus's, her fingers small and warm. She held on, not desperately, but firmly, grounding them both in the present moment. Outside, the summer evening deepened toward night. Crickets began their chorus. Somewhere down the street, children shouted, playing a game that involved running and laughter. Emma shifted slightly, tilting her head to look up at Marcus. Her voice came soft but clear, each word distinct and weighted with meaning that transcended its simplicity. "Dad, I'm happy again." Marcus froze. His breath caught midway between inhale and exhale. The 4 words hit him with physical force, like someone had reached into his chest and released pressure he'd been carrying for so long he'd forgotten it had weight. Tears welled, immediately spilling before he could think to stop them. His arms tightened around Emma, careful not to crush her, but unable to loosen his grip. "Yeah, baby." His voice broke on the words, rough with emotion he couldn't contain. "Yeah, I'm not scared anymore. I'm not sad all the time. I'm just me, like before, but different too. Stronger maybe, but happy." Marcus buried his face in her hair, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, the simple aliveness of his daughter, safe in his arms, and telling him she'd found her way back to joy. Everything he'd done, every fight, every midnight phone call, every moment of standing between her and a world that had tried to break her, all of it condensed into these 4 words. "Dad, I'm happy again." He couldn't speak. His throat had closed completely, overwhelmed by relief so profound it felt physical. Emma seemed to understand, just relaxed against him, letting him cry without comment or comfort because sometimes people need to fall apart before they can fully come back together. They stayed like that for a long time, father and daughter, wrapped in the quiet knowledge that they'd survived the worst and emerged intact. Not unchanged, but whole. When Marcus finally found his voice again, it came thick with emotion. I love you so much, Emma. So damn much. I love you too, Dad. Simple words, insufficient to the depth of feeling between them. But sometimes the simplest words carry the heaviest truth. 2 years slid past with the strange speed of healing time. Emma turned 11 in September 2025, now in 5th grade at Millbrook Elementary, under Principal Ochoa's continued leadership. Her hair hung past her shoulders, often braided or pulled back in a ponytail for soccer practice. Yes, soccer. Emma had surprised everyone, including herself, by joining the Recreational League in spring 2024. Running felt good, she'd explained to Marcus. Using her body for something strong, instead of being reminded of its vulnerability. She'd become a mentor of sorts, working with Millbrook's newly formed Upstander Council. 34 students met weekly to learn peer mediation, conflict resolution, and how to safely intervene when witnessing bullying. Emma co-facilitated alongside a counselor, sharing her story with new students who needed to hear that survival was possible. Her artwork had evolved technically and thematically. The coffee shop displays became regular features pieces, now selling for $75 each. Emma saved half the money for college, donated the other half to anti-bullying nonprofits. A gallery in Missoula had reached out about a youth exhibition. Emma was considering it, nervous but intrigued by the possibility of larger platforms. Marcus had started dating again, carefully with Emma's knowledge and approval. Maria Gonzalez taught English at the middle school, loved hiking and old movies, and treated Emma with the right balance of warmth and space. They'd been seeing each other for 8 months, taking it slow, building foundation before risking structure. The Hells Angels Guardian Initiative had grown beyond anyone's projections. 83 chapters now participated nationwide, standing watch at elementary schools in rural communities where resources for intervention programs were scarce. Jack had been interviewed on national news, his grizzled face and careful words shifting public perception of motorcycle clubs from criminal enterprises to community guardians. Tyler Whitmore had never returned to Millbrook. His family moved to Bozeman, enrolled him in private school, continued fighting legal battles they kept losing. Richard Whitmore's business had contracted significantly as contractors refused to work with a man who'd prioritize reputation over his child's behavioral correction. Tyler himself showed no remorse in court-ordered evaluations, diagnosis trending toward antisocial personality disorder. Some people don't change, Marcus had explained to Emma, and that's not your responsibility. Brandon Hayes completed his therapy program, transferred to public school in Billings for a fresh start. Catherine Hayes had quietly divorced her husband, whose defense of their son's actions had broken something fundamental in their marriage. Brandon wrote anonymously online about children who bully, examining the thought patterns and justifications he'd used. He was trying genuinely to become someone different. Whether he'd succeed remained an open question. Connor Mills completed 18 months of intensive residential treatment, returning to Millbrook with a careful plan involving medication, weekly therapy, and strict behavioral monitoring. He attended a different school, volunteered at the animal shelter as part of learning empathy through caretaking. Dr. James Mills had become an unexpected advocate, speaking at parent education workshops about the dangers of privileging reputation over recognizing when children need serious help. His marriage had survived, barely held together by commitment to Connor's recovery. Emma had seen Connor once at the grocery store in April. They'd locked eyes across the produce section. Connor had nodded once respectfully, then turned away without approaching. The encounter had been strange, but not traumatic. Emma had felt nothing beyond mild discomfort, the kind any person feels seeing someone from their past who'd caused pain. Dr. Rodriguez called it healthy detachment, the ability to acknowledge history without being controlled by it. The Millbrook Annual Summer Fair filled the town and park on June 15, 2026, with that particular chaotic energy of small-town celebrations. Food booths offered everything from funnel cakes to corn dogs. A Ferris wheel spun against impossibly blue sky. Children shrieked on carnival rides while parents watched from picnic tables, holding lemonades and monitoring sunscreen application. Emma had a booth near the art tent, hand-painted sign reading, Emma's Sketches. $5 each, all proceeds to anti-bullying programs. Her portfolio had expanded significantly, drawings ranging from realistic wildlife to abstract emotional pieces that caught people by surprise with their depth. Mia Jordan and Lily staffed the booth with her taking turns managing money, while Emma sketched custom pieces for customers willing to wait 20 minutes. Marcus grilled burgers with Tiny and Rev at a booth run by Glacier Peak Chapter raising money for the Guardian Initiative Expansion Fund. The smell of charcoal and grilling meat mixed with cotton candy and popcorn, creating the distinctive scent of summer celebration. Maria helped serve comfortable enough now with Marcus's world to joke with the bikers, whose appearance still intimidated most civilians. A family approached Emma's booth around 2 in the afternoon. Dr. James Mills, his wife Catherine and Connor, now 13 and taller, quieter, carrying himself with the careful awareness of someone managing mental illness one day at a time. Emma looked up from a drawing she was finishing, her hand pausing mid-stroke. Mia shifted protectively closer. Dr. Mills spoke first, voice respectful of the space between them. Emma, your art is beautiful. You have grown so much as an artist. Emma set down her pencil, considered the compliment, chose grace. Thank you, Dermillos. Connor's voice came softer than she remembered. Emma, can I talk to you just for a minute? I understand if you don't want to. Emma glanced toward Marcus, who'd looked up from the grill, his body language tensing. Emma gave a small nod, indicating she was okay. Mia stayed close as Emma stepped aside with Connor maintaining appropriate distance. I just wanted to say I see you're doing really well, and I'm glad. You deserve to be happy all along, not just now. What we did stole that from you for a while. I'm genuinely sorry. I hope your life stays good. Emma studied him, looking for manipulation or performance. She saw only tired sincerity, the kind that comes from fighting internal battles no one else can see. Her response came measured but not cold. Thank you for saying that. I hope you're doing better too. I'm trying every day. It's hard, but I'm trying. That's all any of us can do. Connor nodded, offered a small awkward wave, and returned to his parents. They purchased one of Emma's drawings, a hawk in flight, paid with a 20, and refused change. After they left, Lily let out a breath she'd been holding. That was intense. You okay? Emma returned to her stool, picked up her pencil, resumed the drawing she'd been working on. Yeah, I'm okay. He seems like he's working on stuff. That's good, I guess. You're really brave, you know that. Emma smiled at her friend's genuine warmth in her expression. I had a lot of help getting here. Brave is easier when you're not alone. The afternoon stretched into evening, the fair taking on golden quality as sun angled toward horizon. Emma sold 14 sketches, her collection jar heavy with bills and coins that would fund workshops at schools across Montana. Marcus closed the grill, packed up equipment, while Tiny and Rev argued good-naturedly about whether mustard or ketchup was superior burger topping. Emma walked over, face flushed, from sun and laughter portfolio tucked under one arm. Marcus pulled her into a one-armed hug while using his free hand to extinguish coals. Good day. Really good day. We raised almost $300. Your mom would be so proud of you. Emma leaned into him, comfortable with the mention of Sarah in a way that had taken years to achieve. I think she'd be proud of you too, Dad, for not giving up on me. Never crossed my mind, baby. Not once. They walked toward the truck as the fair began winding down, carnival music, fading families, gathering children in coolers and folding chairs. The sun painted the sky orange and pink Montana summer evening, settling into its particular brand of perfection. Emma climbed into the truck, buckled her seatbelt, and looked out at the park where people were laughing and living and being together without fear. She thought about the girl she'd been 2 years ago, terrified and humiliated and convinced she was broken. She thought about the journey from that bathroom floor where she gathered her hair and shaking hands to this moment, where she could face the boy who'd hurt her and feel nothing beyond mild acknowledgement. She'd survived. More than that, she'd transformed survival into purpose, helping other children find their own paths through darkness. The truck rumbled to life. Marcus turned on the radio, classic rock station, playing something from the 70s. Emma closed her eyes, let the music and engine vibration and summer air through the window wash over her. She was 11 years old. She had friends who loved her. She had a father who'd moved mountains to protect her. She had artwork people wanted to buy. She had a future that felt possible instead of frightening. Most importantly, she had herself back. Not the same self as before, because trauma changes everyone. It touches. But a self she recognized, liked, felt comfortable inhabiting. A self that had learned strength comes not from never falling, but from getting up repeatedly until standing becomes habit. Marcus glanced over, saw Emma's peaceful expression, and felt gratitude so overwhelming it threatened to spill over again. They'd made it. Through the worst thing he could imagine, a parent facing through bureaucracy and indifference and systems designed to fail children like his daughter, they'd made it to the other side. Not unscathed, but intact. Not unchanged, but whole. The sun dipped below the horizon as they pulled into the driveway. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new growth, new moments of both struggle and triumph. But tonight they were simply a father and daughter who'd survived something terrible together and emerged with their love for each other, not just intact, but deepened by shared battle. Emma opened her door, paused, turned back to Marcus. Dad, yeah, thank you. For everything. For fighting for me when I couldn't fight for myself. Marcus felt his throat tighten, but managed to keep his voice steady. Always Emma, every single time. She smiled, that full, genuine smile that had taken 2 years to fully return, and disappeared into the house. Marcus sat in the truck for another moment, watching the light in her bedroom window flick on, illuminating the space where his daughter would draw, or read, or simply exist in the safety they'd fought to establish. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but no longer terrifying. Emma would keep growing, keep healing, keep using her experience to help others. Marcus would keep protecting her, while gradually learning to let her protection come from her own strength rather than just his. They'd keep moving forward and together proof that love, combined with action, can transform even the darkest moments into foundation for something stronger. Marcus climbed out of the truck, locked it, and walked toward the house where Emma was already calling him to look at a new sketch she'd started. He went inside, closing the door behind him, sealing them both into the warmth and safety of home. Outside, the Montana night settled over Millbrook, quiet and peaceful, and full of the ordinary grace that sustains everyone brave enough to keep showing up for another day.